Welcome to another exciting episode of Lifting the Soul Ministries. Today we have a special guest that I'm honored to welcome. He's a former NHL hockey player, played as captain for the Winnipeg Jets. He played alongside of greats like Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull, and he was also on the All-Star team in 1980. So with his name is Morris Lukowich. For those of you who don't know, and I'm just very thankful to have you here, Morris. And yeah, just great to have you here. And I'd like to hear more about your story and your journey to where we are here today.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. And I want to say thanks for having me here today. And it's been really good to get to know you. And you know what? Thanks for inviting me today. And I feel what we're going to be talking about today is some of the things that happened with my hockey career, and also with my becoming a Christian athlete in 1999, and then also what I'm up to nowadays. And I'm wearing a Winnipeg Jets captain's jersey that I wore in Winnipeg, and it was Winnipeg was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, Winnipeg is actually the town I was born in, so there's a little bit of history there. And my mom apparently said that she actually babysat for Bobby Hull back when he played there. So there is actually a little bit of a connection there. Yeah, yeah. So it's a
But I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan, a little town north of Saskatoon, east of North Battleford, and south of Prince Albert. So a little place called Spears, Saskatchewan. It had a population of 150 people. We didn't even have an indoor hockey rink. All there was 2 sheets of curling ice. And so not only did I learn curling growing up, hockey, but I also learned curling. And my brother, Ed Lukowich, he ended up excelling at it and became world champion in 1986. So this little town of 150 people ended up generating a world curling champion and an NHL hockey player.
well, it really goes to show that doesn't matter where you come from. If you are willing to work at it and put in the dedication, that you can achieve amazing things. And one of the things that we are want to do with in Lifting the Soul Ministries is to talk to men about how can they improve themselves, be better men, be good husbands, all that kind of stuff. And I know that your story is a story that has a lot of inspiration in it from growing up. I remember hearing your story about some of the stuff that your dad did for you, and the encouragement that he was for you, and even some of the dreams that you had when you were younger and you met, I believe, Gordie Howe with your brother at one point for an autograph, which then sparked that dream to play with them a lot later on in your career.
Yes, it did. I actually deliver a talk to players of all ages nowadays. It's called Dreams Can Come True, Miracles Can Happen. And the fact that I got to the NHL, being about 5'9", I was small, and also growing up in the little town of Spears, it is just evidence that miracles can happen when a young player has a dream. And then I feel there's actually a formula for why my dream came true, and that I did get to play with Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull. And I'll go into that right now. It was like I grew up in the Saskatchewan in Spears, and heck, all we had was an outdoor hockey rink, and so we'd be down there playing lots all the time. And it ended up the very first time I played indoors was a town down the road called Hafford, and so it was natural ice, but when it got to be November, December, January, then there was lots of hockey being played indoors, and there was a little bit warmer in there, and but still, it was just way out in the middle of the country. But there was something cool that happened when I was a young boy, about 5 years old, and I talk about this. I look back at where my NHL dream started, and where it started was I remember sitting on my dad's lap, and I was on his left side, on his heart side, And my brother Leonard, who was 3 years older than me, was sitting on the other side. We were watching Hockey Night in Canada. And at that time, it was kind of interesting. Like, we got black and white TV, and which I don't know why it's called black and white, because it's mostly gray and staticky. But we would watch Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday nights. And at that time, we didn't even get all 3 periods. All we got was the second and third period. And Foster Hewitt would come on at the end of the first period, and he would tell us what had happened in the first period. And typically, many of the games were Toronto, Montreal, or the original 16. And I remember sitting on my lap, and Foster Hewitt was interviewing Gordie Howe. And my dad, like, he just spoke so well of these players, like Gordie Howe, Bobby Hull, Henri Richard with the Montreal Canadiens. And it ended up, I was sitting there, and I remember this all started with a thought. And the thought is what originates everything. And I had a thought that, wow, if I could be one of those guys on TV, I think, one, it'd be a lot of fun. And then the other thing, I think it would make my dad happy. And that's where my dream started. It was in that moment. I had that thought, and then my thought went down into my heart, and then my heart started to work on it. And so it's kind of cool. Like, and then when I was 10 years old, my brother Ed and I, we walked into an Eaton store in Saskatchewan. It was in the middle of summer, and Ed was 10 years older than me, and he was, like, I had a brother, Mike and Ed, but like, they were both my mentors. They taught me hockey, curling, golf, baseball, tennis, and they were tremendous coaches. And they took the time to work with my brother Leonard and I. But anyway, so it ended up that Ed and I walked into this Eaton store, and even though, like, so we had driven in from the country 70 miles, and we were looking for a baseball glove. And it ended up that we walked into the sporting goods store, and I had never met an NHL hockey player before. And this was pretty cool what happened. And it ended up that we walked in, and there, sitting at a table in the middle of the sporting goods store, was a man wearing a blue sports jacket, blue shirt, open collar, just doodling away on some paper. And I looked, and I said to my brother Ed, "Is that Gordie Howe?" And I remember, like, we had never met a professional hockey player before. And he looked and he said, "Wow, I think it is." And I said to him, "Well, what's he doing here?" I started to get all nervous. "What's he doing here? What do we do? Do we go over and say hi to him?" And it ended up my brother Ed, being a tremendous mentor, looked back at me and he said, "I don't know. What do you think?" And so there I was, 10 years old, all nervous, seeing Gordie Howe sitting there. And I talk about the next step. And that next step in our lives is so important. Like, that next step for many young people, it could be getting into a car with a drunk driver. It could be towards excessive alcohol, excessive drugs, just so many addictions and bad habits. So that next step in our lives is so important. And anyways, I closed my eyes and I was thinking, what do we do? And there was like a voice said, and I'm going to call it intuition or the Holy Spirit. And I could just hear, "Go for it." And all of a sudden, my left leg moved forward, and we walked towards Gordie Howe. So what was interesting was the middle of the summer. He was there. Eaton's paid him to sign autographs. But that day, Eaton's had forgotten to tell anybody he was there. And it was hot, so nobody was indoors. And we got to spend 45 minutes with Gordie Howe. And it was 45 of the most incredible minutes. It ended up I stood on his left side, and I was maybe like about 4'10" or so. I wasn't a very tall boy at that time. And it ended up, I just sat there, and he talked with my brother Ed the whole time. And they ended up talking about hockey, curling, baseball, golf, and finally fishing. And so when they finally finished, he looked over at me. He said, "Morris," he said, "would you like one of these pictures autographed?" And I looked and I went, "Wow, yes, Mr. Howe, please." And he said, "Morris, what do you love most about hockey?" And I thought about it for a second. And I said, "Mr. Howe, I love to score goals." And he laughed. And he said, "Yeah, you know what? I love to score goals too." So he started signing the autograph, and he was signing it to MAUR And I said, excuse me, Mr. Howe, but my name's Morris. It's Morris. And he said, well, but you said you love to score goals. And Maurice the Rocket Richard is such an incredible scorer. So are you okay if I sign it to Maurice? And I thought about it for a second. I thought, no. But who was I to tell Gordie Howe what to do? So I said, sure. So he literally signed it to Maurice, score lots of goals, Gordie Howe. And I took that picture home and I put it up on the wall above my bed. And beside it, I cut out a picture of Bobby Howe pitching a bale of hay, and where he looks like the Incredible Hulk. It is a fascinating, beautiful picture. And he's just all muscle and hair, and he's got the golden hair. And yeah, so I cut that out of Hockey News and I put it up on the wall beside that picture. And so I had an autographed picture of Gordie Howe, by Gordie Howe, and then this picture of Bobby Hull. And at night, I would get on my knees and I would say, oh, dear Lord, please, someday, can I play with Gordie Howe? And while you're at it, will you throw in Bobby Hull? And you know what? I talk about the power of an innocent boy's prayer and an innocent boy's dream, and how that message got sent out into the universe. And then the universe started to work on it. And I'm convinced there's a formula for success there, that if we truly have a dream, that at nighttime, if we can put it out there, if we can put it out, and actually a good mentor of mine, Howard Lagarde, once taught me that the universe works on the last unanswered question. So I could remember thinking, I'd be saying my prayers at night and I'd say, Lord, you know, what's it gonna take for me to play with Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull? And then the universe went to work on it. And so what's incredible about this is that Gordie Howe actually retires from the NHL in 1970. And I can remember thinking, wow, I was at that time about 15 playing AAA midget hockey in Saskatoon. Now we'd moved to Saskatoon, which was a good move. And I was thinking, wow, what about my dream of playing with Gordie Howe? And it ends up that within 2 years, Bobby Hull has left the NHL. He left the Chicago Blackhawks to form the World Hockey Association. And he was the cornerstone player of the WHA. And it ends up that he signed a $1 million contract to play in Winnipeg. It ends up that Houston Aeros draft both Mark and Marty Howe. And it ends up that Gordie gives the coach GM a call, Bill Dineen, who he knew really well from Detroit. He said, what are your thoughts about a third Howe? And Bill said, come to camp and we'll see. And it ended up that Gordie went to camp and he was the best player next to maybe Mark. Mark was an incredible hockey player, Mark Howe. And and Gordie's on the team and he's scoring 100 points the next year. So the miracles start to happen. Bobby he's the cornerstone of the WHA. The Houston Aeros draft both Mark and Marty. Gordie Howe comes out of retirement. Incredibly, I get drafted by the Houston Aeros too, and the Pittsburgh Penguins in the NHL. At that time, the two leagues were competing against each other. So there's a cool story that goes with that. It ends up, my brother Ed and I negotiate my first contract. It gets into September and it ends up, I get a call from Ren Blair. And at that time, everything was landline. There wasn't any cell phones. And I kept calling my agent. He was a guy out of Mississauga, Ontario. And I couldn't get through to him. And so it ends up that Ren Blair, the GM of Pittsburgh, calls me and he says, hey, we've got to get this figured out. And so it ended up, he said, it's August, September's coming. And so they ended up, I said, well, what are you offering? And so he said, well, we're offering this. We wrote it down on a piece of paper. And this was an interesting conversation next, is that, so he gives us the details of what a one-way and a two-way to the minors looks like. And they said, well, we'll call you right back. And he said, what are you talking about? You're not going to take this offer? And all of a sudden, the peer pressure. And I said, well, we just would like to see, Mr. Blair would like to see what Houston is going to offer. He says, Houston, what are you talking about? That other league, that's not, you're not going to go play there. And so he's yelling at me on the phone. I said, well, Mr. Blair, you know what, we'll call you right back. And click. And I hang up. And my brother Ed, who's sitting beside me, said, wow, you just hung up on an NHL general manager. I said, yeah, I know. He was yelling at me. It was like, so it ends up, we get on the phone, we call Bill Deneen in Houston, and Bill says, well, what's Pittsburgh offering? So we tell him, and he improves the offer. So he offers us more money. And then we said, well, Mr. Deneen, we'll call you right back. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I just want to see what Pittsburgh has to say. And so he's kind of yelling at me too. So I said, well, thanks, Mr. Dean. We'll call you right back. So I hang up on him. So here within about 10 minutes, I've hung up on 2 general managers. And anyway, so we call Pittsburgh back, and we tell them what Houston offered, and they offered more. And it ends up, we go back and forth about 4 times. And then finally, both of them said, that's it. No higher. Take it or leave it. And so we had both contracts on one on one side of the page and one on the other. And we looked at them, and they were virtually the same contracts. And the thing we didn't know, being inexperienced agents, because we'd never done this before, is that teams have a budget. They have a budget. They're going to pay first rounders. Their budget to pay second rounders. And because I was in that area there, I was already slotted in. I was only going to make so much, and that was that. And so it ended up that I remember looking at the paper, and we called Mr. Blair back in Pittsburgh, and he said a very, very funny line. He said something out of Paradise by the Dashboard Lights by Meatloaf. He said, "What's it going to be, boy?" And he says, "You're going to come to the NHL and play with the big boys. Or you're going to go to that other league." And I looked over at my brother Ed, and I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "You know what? I don't know." He says, "This is your decision." And so I was thinking Pittsburgh NHL, Houston WHA. I was going back and forth, Pittsburgh, Houston, WHA, NHL, WHA. And I closed my eyes, and there was like a voice said again, just guidance, said, go play with Gordie Howe. It was so clear. And I remember I opened up my eyes, and I got back on the phone. I said, Mr. Blair, I'd like to thank you for the offer to come to Pittsburgh. But you know what? I want to play with Gordie Howe. And he didn't take it very well. He said, well, you little shit. He said, you'll never play a day in the NHL. And he hung up on me. And I looked over at Ed, and I said, wow, he just hung up. And I remember Ed said, well, it looks like you're a Houston Arrow. And said, yeah. So we got on the phone. We called Mr. Deneen, and I said, he was the coach GM of Houston. I said, Mr. Deneen, you know, I just really want to play with Gordie Howe. And he said, good move, good choice. And you know what? It was. I chose a man instead of a league, instead of a team. I chose to go play with a man, and it was incredible. He was something to watch. He was extremely dirty, but he was also extremely talented. And so, you know, like, he could score goals, and he could hit hard, but also he was, if anybody ever messed with his boys, Mark or Marty, there was bloodshed. There was always, he was like, he turned into a mama grizzly bear to protect his boys, to protect his son. So it was really incredible to play a hockey year with him.
That's a great story, Morris. And I like how, when you say you close your eyes and you're just listening, and you hear that voice, that inner voice. And that's just such an important aspect, I believe, of being a person of faith, is to be able to just listen for that guidance, because it is there. And what I find out is really awesome is throughout your life, you can see how that has not only impacted you as a person, but it also led to where you had these awesome experiences in life as well. And yeah, so I don't know, for myself, that I just find that just very inspiring, and I know for myself as well, it also plays a very important role into my life, and that's what brought me into doing Lifting the Soul Ministries, is following that guidance, following that voice, and it's really cool. So,
you know what, Jason, I'd love to tell a story about Gordie Howe.
Yeah, that'd be great.
that says something about character. Because as
Yeah.
we go through life, as men, something we do is we start to check out who are other men that we can trust.
Hmm.
Like it's so often in life, like as men, we have our boys, and it's incredible. We grow up and we end up carving out relationships with other men and women, but we carve out relationship with our boys. These are men that we trust, and we trust by doing stuff together and by them watching them how they do things, watching their character, watch whether that man keeps his word, watch whether that man will go that extra mile to be of support to me, or whether he can be supported. So it's very interesting to have that. Now, Gordie Howe, so it was incredible to play with him. So it ended up that in the middle of the summer, Houston actually had taken me down, flew me down to Houston with also Brian Maxwell. We had played for the Medicine Hat Tigers in the Western Hockey League, and they were hoping that both of us would come there. And so it ended up, we got to spend like 4 days with Gordie Howe and Mark and Marty. And we went out for suppers, and we went golfing, and we also went fishing. So there's a cool fishing story is that it ended up that we got on this airplane, a little airplane, and we flew. The owner of the team, his name was Walter Fondra, and he had a beautiful home out on an island near Corpus Christi right on the Gulf of Mexico. So it ended up that we went out and we were fishing, and we were fishing for a kingfish, which is kind of a long, slender fish. And it ended up that we were getting skunked, and it was a very, very hot day, and we were out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, and there's nothing out there except for oil wells, and that are set up in all through the Gulf of Mexico. So we're out there fishing around. We're not catching anything, and it ends up that I said to Gordie, well, let's make a bet on who's going to catch the next fish, and whoever loses has to guzzle a beer. And he said, sounds good. So I threw my hook into the water, and it ends up that all of a sudden I feel a bit of a tug, and so I start reeling it a little bit, and I said to Marty, he was right beside me. Like in the boat was Gordie, his son Marty, Walter Fondra, and the owner of the team, Brian Maxwell, and myself. And it ends up that I felt this tug, and I said, Marty, I think maybe I got a bite. And he said, why is that? I said, I felt a bit of a tug. He said, well, set the hook. So you got to take the rod and whip it backwards. And so I did it once. He said, you know what, do it again. So I do it again, and it ends up I'm reeling, but my line goes completely limp. And so I'm reeling away, and I said, oh my gosh, I must have lost the hook. Like the line's just slack. And Marty said, I don't know about that. He said, reel faster. And literally, I went to reel faster. And as soon as he said that, this jumped out of the water right beside us. So it is about that far away, and it's just waving itself back and forth. And then boom, it's back in the water. And then it takes off. And the line is zinging off the rod, like off the reel. And so I'm reeling away now. And it ends up they put me into this chair and strap me in. And Gordie's standing behind me. And it ends up that it's like it has taken tons of line, this fish. And it ends up after about 5 minutes or so, and we're chasing this thing around the ocean. Gordie's driving the boat. And then all of a sudden we see it on the horizon, and it jumps out of the water, and it is about this big on the horizon. Like it has gone out hundreds and hundreds of yards, and it just about took all the line off the spool. But anyways, so I'm reeling away, and then all of a sudden Gordie taps me on the shoulder, and he says, Morris, can I show you something that's going to help you land this fish? And I call these now moments, Jason. They're incredible moments where it's like, oh my God, like how incredible. And I'm thinking, wow, Gordie Howe has just asked me permission to show me something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to myself, like, wow, who else is getting to experience this? And then I said, well, sure. And he said, Morris, you have got, what happened was I, with my left arm, I had the rod, and he says, you have got to relax your hand. And literally, he peeled my fingers off the rod. He said, he says, you've got to hold the rod like this. Otherwise, your arm will cramp up and you'll never catch this fish. And then I remember he said, the way we're going to catch this fish is with our back and our legs. And he said, so all you're going to do is you're just going to, just lean back and use your legs, use my legs and back, and then just reel forward. And so we just started that, and we went for 45 minutes. And then all of a sudden the fish, and it jumped 10 times along the way, trying to spit out the hook. And then at the end, it just kind of came up right behind the boat, and it was out of the water and literally just came right in the boat. And Marty had a glove on and just reached down, grabbed it by the nose right here, grabbed it right by the nose and just pulled it into the boat. And it laid on the floor, and it looked like this. It just looked so incredibly beautiful. And then after about 10 seconds, it just went straight gray. And I said, what happened? And Marty said, well, it's dying. It's not getting any oxygen. And so I reached down and I picked it up, and I went over to the side of the boat, and they said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm throwing it back in. And they said, no, you're not. This is a keeper. And so, well, oh, okay. So we kept the fish, and then literally we headed in. We were finished fishing for the day. We caught one fish. We caught this. So it ended up that when we got back to the shore, I asked if I could have a souvenir of it. And Gordie said, oh, sorry, we've already given it to the Mexicans for food. Yeah, oh, okay. And so we ended up, and Gordie guzzled that beer. And then we had supper, but what an incredible day of fishing. So after I signed with Houston, I'm down there, and my dad taught me something as a young guy, a young hockey player. He said, Morris, you know what? Make sure that the coach knows that you're the hardest working hockey player. And he said, be the last player coming off the ice. And so I followed that coaching for years, and it was very, very good. It's the only thing he really ever said to me about coaching. He left everything else to my brother Mike and Ed to coach. But it ended up that, so I was out on the ice, and all of a sudden I got a call from the trainer. He says, hey, get in here. Bill Deneen wants to see you. And he's the coach and GM. And so I come hustling off the ice. I come in the dressing room, and everybody's in the dressing room, and there's a crate, a great big wooden crate in the middle of the dressing room. And the thing is like really long. And it ends up that I'm standing there, I'm looking at it, and everybody's staring at me. And it ends up that Gordie walks over to me and has a crowbar in his hand. Now, I mean, Gordie was dangerous with a hockey stick. I didn't know what he's going to be like with a crowbar. But he walks over and he says, Morris, he said, this is a piece of your signing bonus for having come to play in Houston. And he said, we just want to say thanks for being a Houston Arrow. And he gives me this crowbar. And I kind of look at him, and everybody's smiling sheepishly, and they're all nodding towards the crate. So I walk over, and I start ripping the boards off this crate. Have zero idea what the heck is going on. Ripping it off. And finally, and this thing was nailed together tight. Like, I mean, some of the guys are helping me pull the boards off. And it ends up all of a sudden we pull off this one board, and what I can see is this eye right here. And I realize, wow, it's that fish that we caught that was supposed to have been given to the Mexicans. So that says something about Gordie Howe, that he took the time and the effort to, he knew how incredible this was, the experience for me. And yeah, and then so he went and got this, took it to a taxidermist, and I mean, just such an incredible memory. And that just says something about Gordie Howe, the character that he had to get this done. And also the owner of the team, Walter Fundred.
Mm.
And then one other story just about Colleen Howe was that Christmas. It ended up that I was living on my own in Houston. I had an apartment, and literally I had a girlfriend back in Medicine Hat that eventually I got married to, Eva. And it ended up that I just had a conversation with her and then hung up the phone. And I thought to myself, wow, Christmas Day. Wonder what I'm going to do the rest of the day. And literally the phone rang. And then I picked it up, and it's Colleen Howe. And she said, Morris, what are you doing for Christmas? And I said, well, she said, yeah, I thought. She said, you're on your own, right? And then I said, yeah. And she said, well, you're not. You're coming to the Howe family for Christmas. And so it ended up that she invited me over, and literally I went over and spent Christmas with the Howes. And what an incredible experience. Fantastic supper. And I mean, it just says something about the whole family.
Well, it also says a lot about the importance of having powerful role models in your life. You know, that's one thing that we as men, it's very easy for us to want to isolate and you know, get caught up in life and, you know, well, I got to support the family, I got to do this, I got to do that. But, you know, when you think about your experiences with Gordie Howe and what kind of a mentor he was to you and everything like that, and along with your brother, Ed, right? Like the importance of having these powerful men in your life is really important. And it really played, I believe, what I'm seeing is a very strong role in your life in regards to who you are today. And I know when we first got on here, you wanted to show a few other things that you have in your basement there.
Yeah. So this is we live in Calgary, in Northwest Calgary, in Scenic Acres, and I have a bit of a hockey cave down here. So um, here's some of the jerseys. So I ended up there's a Houston Aeros jersey. This was the Winnipeg Jets. This was actually the jersey from the Heritage Classic. It's right there, and in 2016. And actually, what's really cool is I a lot of times end up at charity hockey events. So I ended up getting a couple pictures got sent to me by a camera guy in Winnipeg, and these are from the 2016 outdoor game. So that's a real cool one. That's actually Rollinson, the goalie for Edmonton Oilers. And there was a shot rebound, and I'm shooting that right into the middle of the net. And you can see the puck right there. And incredibly, that puck is going in the middle of the net, and he reaches back and gets it with his stick. And it goes straight sideways and hits one post, goes across, hits the other post, and goes out. And I looked at him. We had played together with Team Canada. I said, Rolling. Wow. And he laughed. He said, oh, man, I got lucky. Yeah. So, and then on this one, this is incredible. There was a camera in the back of the net. And so that is the football stadium. And that's the sky. And so there's a shot. You can see the puck coming in right there. And it actually goes underneath Ranford's arm who score on that shot. Anyway, so see, these are some of the jerseys. So like I was just at a fireman police fire game in Airdrie on Saturday. And so I took all these jerseys out and just set up a table and signed autographs prior to the game. And so this is a 1980 NHL All-Star jersey. That was Gordie Howe's last All-Star game and Wayne Gretzky's first. And I can remember just waiting there to go on the ice and just thinking about all the people that had helped me to get there. All the coaches through minor hockey. Jack Shoup, our coach with the Medicine Hat Tigers. My brother Ed, my brother Mike, my brother Leonard. We used to play hockey together all the time. This was a very cool moment. I just remember thinking and just saying a prayer of thanks for all the men, like all the coaches, my mom, my dad, They came to every game. My sisters, like, it was such a sort of a family affair and a community affair. And yeah, so there's some jerseys, and then here's some kind of cool pictures. This ends up being the last goal I ever scored in the NHL. It was an overtime winner against the LA Kings. And that's actually, so I was with LA, and that's Boston. And that's Billy Radford right there. And here's the guy that actually took this picture in LA. He said it was one of the best pictures he'd ever taken, because it ended up, I went in, and Billy Radford is an incredible goalie, but every goalie's got a weak spot. And so with Billy, I knew, I'd played with him in Boston. I knew if you went in and you gave a little fake and went sideways, he would open up his 5-hole and you could drive a semi-trailer through there. And so you can see how he's attempting to get his legs closed. And I'm actually kind of blocking on his body, but neither one of my skates are touching the ice. And the puck is rolling out of the net on its side. And it was cool. If you see these white pants here, a dad picked his daughter up and threw her in the air when he scored this goal. And she hasn't landed, and that's 40 years later.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so here was a cool thing we did one night. We were going to play the Flames in Winnipeg, so we called it Ambush at the Arena. And ended up, we had a 12 shooter, and it was like sponsored by a country team. This is actually a very first professional picture with the Houston Aeros. This is a picture of one of my Pee-wee teams. It's called the Empires. And we had a tremendous team. We actually won 3 provincial championships. That's Les Holash, our head coach. And I'm forgetting that's Rick. Forget his name though. Oh, we had a good hockey team. So here's some guys that I played with in Italy. Here's the tremendous Gordie Howe. It ended up that as much as I disliked Dave Semenko, and he one time broke his stick over my head when I took a run at Gretzky one time, I got to meet him after and hockey, and he was one of the funniest guys I ever met. And we became really good friends. And this was a picture of us together at the Heritage Classic in Winnipeg in 2016. And then sadly, within about 4 months, he had died from pancreatic cancer. And here's just some pictures of the Houston Aeros. There's my daughter, Zoe. She's a beautiful singer. Another picture of Semenko. Some stuff from Europe. This is a fantastic picture. I've got a Gordie Howe and Mark Howe and myself at the All-Star game in Quebec in 1978. Okay, and you know what? Yeah, so there's just some it's kind of a cool picture. I played with Team Canada in Sweden in 1981 it was. And there's Alan Eagleson at the time. He was the president of the NHL Players Association. Don Cherry was our coach. We had Lanny McDonald was our captain right there. We had a very, very good team. And this picture of the LA Kings from 1986-87. This was an all-star game. There's Pat Quinn. He was a tremendous coach. I got to play for him in Los Angeles. One of the best coaches I ever had. This was a WHA All-Star game in 79 where we played the Russian Dynamo in Edmonton. 3 games, we beat them all 3. And this was the All-Star game in Quebec. This is a picture of the Heritage Classic. That was it was an absolutely beautiful day in October in 2016. And there's Howard Chuck, I think, is right here. Incredibly, he's passed away. During the summer, when I got out to play golf with Reggie Leach in a place called Latoon, just north of, or Toulon, north of Winnipeg. He had a fantastic tournament. ended up raising $70,000 for junior golf. So it was really fun to get out there and play some golf with Reggie. And then this was something we purchased back in about 1980, and it was a bubble hockey game. And this is a little bit different. Like, this isn't a Czechs model. The Czechs model has a lower bubble, but this one has a nice high bubble, so that right when we're playing here, we can actually see the other goalie. With the Czechs game, it's the clock gets in the way, it's lower. So this, when we have the very first time I got this, I remember I had Howard Chuck over, Scott Arneal, Dougie Smale, Tim Trimper, Murray Eves, and we ended up playing hockey for about 12 hours straight. And then we had to play the next day, and we played terrible. Like, we were all we were burnt out from our one day of hockey, but we had so much fun on this hockey game. And then here's just some weights. I do some strength training down here. A friend of mine, actually my billet in Medicine Hat, Jim Triber, gave me this because I've had a little bit of lower back problems, and so that's helped that out lots. And then this is kind of our just pool room ping pong table. And I got these 2 jerseys at an auction one time. It was the WHA 25th reunion. Ended up, I bought these. 2 of the most incredible hockey players.
Mm-hmm.
This supposedly is a jersey that Gretzky wore in his last game that he ever played. Well, so anyways, we just have a lot of fun down here. We party sometimes. There was a very nice thing. They had a luncheon where they had all sorts of the Jets captains come back to Winnipeg. This about 5 years ago. So it was a fantastic time. Yeah. I'm a part of a men's organization. So every once in a while, when we have Halloween parties to raise money for charity, we raise money for gifts at Christmas time for families. I dress up as a Viking.
Nice.
And some hockey pucks from along the way. I one time scored 65 goals in Winnipeg. That was the 50th goal. So just some kind of cool trophies from along the way. That's my nephew, Brett. He was a player with Spokane Chiefs and then played 1 year pro in France, and now he's a fireman in Calgary. So, and just to walk around. This is a cool thing. I got to do a commercial, and if anybody goes to YouTube and you just type in Gretzky Lukowich 7-Up commercial, you'll see a 7-Up commercial that played during the 1980 NHL All-Star game. And so that's Bunny LaRock here. He was in it, and he's passed away now. Gretzky and myself. Some of the other guys were Gary Carter. They did a baseball one, Montreal Expos. It was Leonard Doozy, soccer player, and I forget who this was from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Yeah.
Nice. It definitely looks like you got a lot of really great memorabilia down there and stuff. So that's really cool. A lot of real good history there. A lot of good memories.
And you know what, a fun thing? There's Toyo University. I one time went over to Japan, and I worked with a university team, and they were third in their league, but we put together a formula for them. They hadn't beat the number 1 team in 8 years. They lost 32 games in a row, and it ended up they were called Meiji, the other team, the team that was in first. And it was, but I worked with their head coaches, and we put together a plan that I thought could work. And it did. They won 3 out of 4 games that year, and they won the league, which was the first time they'd ever won the league. So that was a real success. And that was a very fun experience. My gosh, Japan was interesting. Wow.
Oh, that's cool.
So, yeah. You know what? After I finished my hockey in the NHL, I got to play 1 year in Italy. So I got to play with these guys here. And we had the Italian league was actually a very good league because there were lots of Italian Canadian players there, and then I played another 4 years in Switzerland, and the hockey in Switzerland is also very, very good and a lot of fun, and the skiing was incredible.
I can believe it. That's cool. So, Morris, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, you know what? Nowadays, I work with a company called Live Barn. So we install unmanned camera systems into hockey arenas, and also uh, football fields, baseball fields, basketball courts, volleyball courts, swimming pools. That's primarily in the U.S., but it actually started in one rink in Montreal, and now Live Barn. So it's an unmanned camera system and just operates on its own. And people can go in and watch games live or on demand for about a month. And now Live Barn is in over 4,900 ice surfaces around North America and 25 in Sweden. So it's been fun.
Wow.
I love giving back to hockey. And so that's one thing. Also, I'm an associate head coach with a U16 girls team in the Bow Valley organization in Cochrane. So we have a practice today at 4:15, and we play in a league called the Female Super League, and it is fun to work with this team because the possibilities now for young gals, both on university scholarships in Canada and the U.S., but also in the Professional Women's Hockey League, which has just started. I mean, that is very fantastic hockey. So there's such possibilities now for gals. And so it's fun coaching this group. They're hungry. They want to get better. They're keen on winning. And then another thing, I'm working with a man by the name of David Saxby. And David is an experienced businessman. And we're doing something that's called Maximum Spark. That's corporate leadership and team building training. And so we're doing events that can be like a half day of where it's a hockey event or a curling event. My brother Ed comes out, or we can do like a golf event. So we're just getting this going, and I love it because I love to lead activities that create kind of like now moments, like what I experienced with Gordie Howe and with Bobby Hull, and so I love creating fun experiences for people where they get something out of it. By the way, I'd love to talk about my testimony of how I came to be a Christ follower. Is there time for that?
Yeah, we could set aside about 5 minutes for that. Sure, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So what happened was I ended up growing up in, like I said, in Spear, Saskatchewan, and we went to a church about 6 miles down the road in Richard for church all the time. So I grew up being a Roman Catholic, and it ended up that along the way, I can still remember the very first time that anybody ever mentioned about Christian athletes. And I was playing hockey in Houston with the Arrows. So I would have been 20 then. And we were going to play the Birmingham Bulls that night. And I remember looking at their lineup and I'm seeing, wow, Paul Henderson, the incredible Paul Henderson, who had scored the winning goal in the 1972 Summit Series against the Russians, at that time was playing with the Birmingham Bulls. And I remember I said that. And there was one of the guys walked over. He was a defenseman. His name was John. And he said, he's a Bible thumper. So stay away from him. And I remember looking at it and I said, Bible thumper, what's that? I'd never heard of the term. And he says, oh, he's a Jesus freak. Yeah, he says, he's bad news. So stay away from him. And I was thinking, what? The incredible Paul Henderson? Why would I want to stay away from him? Like, he's one of Canada's most fantastic heroes. Incredible hero. But anyway, so during that game, when I talk about now moments, like there are moments where it's kind of like I got almost like pinch myself, like, wow, am I really here? And it was back checking on Paul Henderson. And we were skating down the ice. We skated all the way from their blue line all the way to my blue line. And I remember we were just stride and stride. It was like perfect unison. And I was covering him. And I thought to myself, wow, like in the moment, I've made it to the big time. I'm beside Paul Henderson. And it ended up the pass happened to come across and he got it. And I just knocked it off his stick. And so I checked Paul Henderson. But it was kind of, and then after the game, I thought to myself, wow, he didn't seem to be a very strange guy. I mean, he plays hard, he skates hard. I think he scored a couple goals in that game. And I thought, gee, first. But that was the first time I'd ever heard that term. And it wasn't called Christian athlete. I mean, it was Jesus freak, Bible thumper. So the next time I got to experience a Christian athlete. So here I'm a Roman Catholic, so I'm going to church, although I must admit, in Houston, I think I maybe went to church once or twice. And then when I was in Winnipeg, I went to church more. It ended up that Houston folded and we got picked up by Winnipeg. And I attended a church there called St. Patrick's. It was a real nice church. And but the next time I hear of a Christian athlete, we're playing against Washington Capitals, and it's Ryan Walter. And somebody says the same thing. Yeah, kind of stay away from that guy. And but I had played with Ryan in an all-star game in the Western Hockey League. He had played with Kamloops, and I thought he was an incredibly quality guy. So here again, so I watched him through that game and this whole thing that he's a Bible thumper, Jesus freak. Same thing again. And I'm watching him and I'm thinking, wow, he seems like an incredible leader. So I'm not getting this. It doesn't add up. And then, so what happens is that it ends up in Winnipeg. Then I ended up with a number of Christian athletes. There was Ed Staniowski, he was a goalie. Dougie Smale, incredible, tremendous player. Tim Trimper, Scott Arneal. And so I started to get exposed to this idea of being of what a Christian athlete was about. But it ended up that, like, so Ed Staniowski kind of started to have me read the Bible on while we were flying. And so we would be going together, we'd read something, we'd talk about it. But I found the Bible to be a very confusing document at that time. So it ended up that I perhaps got a little bit turned off by this. But I remember saying to Ed one time, I said, Ed, you know what? I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. Like, why do you keep bugging me? Why don't you bug those other guys? They don't believe in God. They don't believe in Jesus. And that kind of, I think he got a little bit insulted by that, maybe when he backed off a little bit. And so it ended up because sort of eased off. So it ended up I played with the Jets in 1980. It ended up that in 1997, about 17 years later, I'm going to church in Calgary. We've relocated there. I'm attending a church called St. Luke's. It ends up that it's a Catholic church, but I have a chiropractor who is saving my back. His name is David Shovey, and he's a Reformed Catholic, but he's attending another church called Country Hills Community. And he keeps saying to me, I'm getting treated. He says, you know what, Morris, come over there. Come over to that church. See what's happening there. And it ended up that I kind of brushed him off. And then I remember I had 2 Sundays in a row where I had kind of a weird experience at my Catholic church, St. Luke's, where it seemed like the whole room was full of fog. And it was like people were asleep. Like the Roman Catholic Church had become for me a time, because it was so repetitive that I knew it so much that I took just time to pray for my mom and my dad and family members. And I'd close my eyes. I remember I opened my eyes, and it was 2 Sundays in a row. It was like the room was full of fog and smoke, and it was like everybody was asleep. And the second time, everybody was snoring. But I had said, God, if you want me to go over to that other church, please send me a signal. And literally, Jason, those were the signals. Mm-hmm. And so the next Sunday, I told Dave, hey, I'm going to come to church there at Country Hills Community. And the church was actually meeting in a movie theater right across the road. And so I went, and I was in the service, and I went, wow. people are alive here. Where it seemed like back at the other church at St. Luke's, they seemed to be asleep, and I wasn't getting much out of it. And this new church, the pastor delivered an incredible message, and so it ended up. I got into that church. It was Country Hills Community Church. It was meeting in the movie theater, and I would help set up the stage on it. Like, we literally set up a stage every Sunday and then took it down. And so I started doing that. I got more and more involved in it. I just kept listening to Brian Holhalter. He was our pastor. And then I started to get this. It was interesting. I'd said back in Winnipeg to Ed Stanilowski, hey, you know what? I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. But I didn't realize it isn't about that. It's about having a relationship with him and to put him in the driver's seat. I was doing a terrible job of driving. Like, my automobile was in the ditch. It was a mess. My life was a mess. I was lost. I didn't know what honor was anymore. And I hadn't been a very good husband through the NHL my years. And like, I really was lost. And it ended up that I finally got it. That it was about a relationship with Christ. So I went to Pastor Brian and I said, you know what? I'm ready to get baptized. It isn't about believing in God. It's about having this relationship with Jesus. I said, so I'm ready to get baptized. And he said, fantastic. I said, but I'm not going to get baptized in that tub. And he said, why is that? And I said, well, one, I'm not wanting to get in there with anybody else's sins. And then I said, and when I'm finished with the water, like, I'll probably stay in the tub. Like, so I want lots of water, moving water. And he laughed and he said, you know what, I know a spot. So he actually took me out into Bragg Creek area, which is the foothills of the mountains. And we went out to this one spot, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was an area that went down to a beautiful creek, and it came out of the Kananaskis area. And it came down, and it literally, the creek made a left turn, and then it went down and made a right turn. And there were some pools there, and it ended up that, and out of the side of the river, out of the bank, there's a huge bank on the one side, had fallen a rock that was about 10 feet high, a huge rock, but it was in the shape of a diamond. And it sat right over these pools. And so that was the spot where I got baptized. And Brian came in with he had a wetsuit on. I went in with just shorts. And it ended up that I had a buddy by the name of Russ Emerson come in with me. He was also a Christian. And I remember just before we went in, Russ pulled me aside and he said, Morris, this is so cool. He said, in a few seconds here, you'll be baptized. And what's really cool is you will never, ever again walk alone. Jesus will always be with you. And I thought that was such a cool thing for him to say to me right before I got baptized. Yeah. So anyways, that's my story. And now I attend a church. The movie theater, the lease ran out on it. So it ended up that we all in the congregation, we prayed, and it's incredible. A real estate guy in our congregation found 37 acres outside of Calgary on the way to Cochrane. And so we purchased it as a church, and ended up, we built a church out there. It was Country Hills Community. Incredible. It failed the first time. It didn't attract enough people somehow. And then ended up an organization called Rock Point purchased it. So now we attend Rock Point Church. But we have the absolute best view of the Rocky Mountains from our foyer. So I invite you to come out and see the church, Jason. It is beautiful. It's fantastic. And it's cool. Like, we have pastors that deliver such incredibly powerful messages. And so I do each day now, seeing how I can walk with Christ, keep handing him over my worries, my fears, and I can feel the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is with me all the time.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's only when my ego gets engaged and stuff like that that it ends up that I get disengaged. But so
Yeah.
when I can go quiet and I just invite in the Holy Spirit, normally I feel it as a vibration in my chest
Mm.
or in my jaw, and then it knows that I know I'm not alone.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Morris. That's such a beautiful story. And, you know, yeah, it's so important to, in my perspective as well, right? Like being a fellow Christian and fellow believer in Jesus and working on my relationship with Him daily. That's such a been such a pivotal point of my journey as well. And I'd just like to encourage all the men and even the women who will be listening to this video. Just if you have any more questions about faith, about building a relationship with Jesus, please feel free to reach out to us here, and I would be happy to share a little bit more about that. So, Morris, we're coming to a close here. How can people reach out to you or connect with you, and what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, one, you can take a look for me on LinkedIn, or my email is Luke, Luke 212 at shaw.ca. And actually, if you look it up it's kind of interesting, Luke 212 or Luke 21 2. They're both very interesting quotes. So, yeah, it's my number when I played hockey was 12. And so our house number is 212. And so now my email is Luke. It's like the second coming of 12. It's Luke 212 at shaw.ca. Or you can reach out by phone, text, 403 660 3006. Love to hear from you. Again, 403 660 3006. Jason,
And
I
do you
want
have
to say thanks for today.
Yeah, I thank you as well. And do you have any parting words you'd like to share?
Yeah, I do. I wanted to tell one Bobby Hall story.
Sure.
And, we had the WHA 50th reunion in Whistler. This was a couple of years ago. And it ended up that Bobby was there. And it was, I thought it might be the last time I ever see him. So I wanted to go there and say thanks to him for having formed the WHA, because it really gave many of us a chance to play professional hockey. It ended up that we ended up signing autographs at a sporting goods store in Guilford Mall in Vancouver. And so it ended up he started signing at about noon hour, and so did I. But we were in different areas, and I had jerseys set out. And so I was packed up about 4 o'clock. I had to get going to catch a flight, and I went back to see him. And he was in the back, and he had been signing there with Anders Hedberg and Alf Nilsson, but they had left to get flights back to Sweden. And so Bobby was on his own. And so I shook hands with him, and I said thanks, and we got a picture together. And then just as I was going to get going, he was going to keep signing autographs till 7 o'clock. Like he was in pretty rough shape at the end. He really enjoyed his wine, and he had drank so much through the years. Somehow he never stumbled into an Alcoholics Anonymous room, which was too bad. So in the end, the alcohol had really done a lot of bad stuff to his body. But anyways, he said to me, he said, Lukey, he said, you know what, can you do me a small favor? And I said, sure, Bobby, what's that? He said, could you give my foot a scratch? It's itching so bad and I can't reach it. And I looked down, and there he had his shoes off and his socks off because of he was drinking red wine and his feet were swelling up. So it ended up, I went down and I gave his foot a scratch. And then I said, hey, Bobby, can I do you a small favor? He said, what? And I said, can I give your feet a massage? And he said, what? And I said, yeah, like I know lots about what's the foot massage therapy called. But I said, like, I'll give your feet a massage and it'll just re-energize you. Like, And he said, really? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, sure. So I gave each foot like a massage for about 5 minutes. And there's all sorts of points on the feet can be touched, and then the body just gets re-energized. And so I did 5 minutes for each foot. And then I came up and I said, how was that? And he said to me, he said, Lukey, he says, I think I just felt a piece of heaven. And I said, wow, that's cool. He said, that was really nice. And then we shook hands, and that was the last time I ever saw him. And anyway, I just prayed that he is in heaven. He's one of the best men I've ever met. He would stay like an hour after a game signing autographs. And he signed every autograph with this beautiful Bobby Hull autograph that was so easy to read. You know, it was so unique. And so he wasn't perfect. He had some faults, but boy, he was a good man. Yeah. So I was so glad I got to spend that time with him. I was so glad I got to massage his feet.
Wow, what a beautiful story and what a beautiful act of service, Morris. And yeah, it's just been such an honor to have you here on this podcast with me, to share your story, to share some of your history, and just to learn from your experience. And so, for those of you who have tuned into this, I want to thank you also for being here. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this out with your peers, because messages like these are important to get out. And so, thank you again for being here, and we'll see you next time. Much love.
And Jason, you know what? Are we still recording?
Yeah.
So, hey, I'm a huge Jets and Flames fan. So go Jets, go Flames, go. And remember, shoot to score.
You heard it from a legend. Awesome.